A millionaire hired a homeless woman to attend his ex's wedding, but he never expected to fall in love. And before we continue, let us know in the comments where you're watching from and make sure to subscribe to our channel for more gripping stories like this. Enjoy the story. Jonathan Brooks pulled up to the small cafe on the city's less glamorous side. The glow of streetlights barely illuminated the cracked sidewalks and faded storefront signs. It wasn't the kind of place someone of his status was expected to be. But tonight was different. This wasn't about status. It was about making a statement. A bold, unexpected one. As the driver opened the door, Jonathan adjusted the cuffs of his tailored suit and stepped onto the pavement. He glanced at the sign above the cafe door, Riverside Diner, a place he would have never known existed if his assistant Paul hadn't suggested it. Sophia Bennett would be waiting inside. Sophia, a name that had stuck in his mind ever since Paul mentioned her. A woman who had once been a nurse, but had lost everything after a series of misfortunes. Now she lived on the streets, but had somehow built a quiet reputation for helping others in similar situations. She sounded like the last person anyone would expect Jonathan Brooks to associate with, which was exactly why he wanted to meet her. The cafe was almost empty when he stepped inside, its interior warm and modest. Booths lined the walls, and a faint smell of coffee and grilled sandwiches lingered in the air. A few patrons glanced up as he entered, their eyes lingering on his expensive attire before returning to their conversations. Jonathan ignored the stares and scanned the room until he saw her. Sophia sat near the back, facing the door. Her gaze met his, steady and unflinching. She wasn't what he had expected. Taller than most women, with striking features and deep, expressive eyes, she carried an air of quiet strength. Her clothes were simple, jeans and a plain sweater, but clean and neatly pressed. Despite her circumstances, there was a sense of dignity about her. Jonathan walked toward the booth, offering a polite nod as he reached her. Sophia Bennett. She stood and extended her hand. "You must be Jonathan Brooks. Please just call me Jonathan." He shook her hand firmly, surprised by her confident grip. Sophia gestured for him to sit, then returned to her seat. "Paul didn't give me many details, just that you needed someone for a unique arrangement. Care to explain?" Jonathan smiled faintly. He appreciated her directness. "It's a little unconventional, I'll admit. I need a date for an event. A high-profile wedding, actually. My ex-fiancée's wedding. To be exact." Sophia raised an eyebrow. "Let me guess. You want to show her you've moved on and make a scene while you're at it?" "Something like that," Jonathan admitted with a chuckle. "But it's more than just appearances. People in my world are shallow, obsessed with status. I want to show them that there's more to life than their superficial expectations." Sophia crossed her arms, leaning back slightly. "And you think bringing someone like me will accomplish that?" "Yes," Jonathan replied without hesitation. "You're not just someone like you. You've faced real challenges, and you've come through stronger for it. That's something no amount of money can buy. I want people to see that strength, and maybe question their assumptions about me in the process." Sophia studied him for a moment, her expression unreadable. "So, let's cut to the chase. What's in it for me?" Jonathan leaned forward slightly, resting his arms on the table. "A fair payment, of course. But beyond that, an opportunity. This could open doors for you. Connections, resources, whatever you need to get back on your feet. I'm not offering charity, Sophia. I want this to be a partnership." Sophia narrowed her eyes slightly, as if testing the sincerity in his words. After a long pause, she spoke again. "I've been underestimated my whole life. People see me on the street and think they know my story. They don't. I'm not some pity project." "I don't see you that way," Jonathan said softly. "That's exactly why I'm here. You're more than what people assume." Another silence stretched between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. Jonathan could feel the weight of Sophia's thoughts as she considered his offer. Finally, She exhaled and gave a small, determined nod. "All right," she said, extending her hand once more. "I'll do it. But we're doing this on equal terms. No pity, no condescension." "Agreed." "Agreed," Jonathan replied, shaking her hand again. He felt a strange sense of relief, as though something significant had just been set in motion. They spent the next half hour discussing details. Jonathan explained the date and location of the wedding, what was expected of them, and how they would present themselves. Sophia listened attentively, asking questions when necessary, but never losing that calm, composed demeanor that intrigued him. "So, what's your ex like?" Sophia asked at one point, a hint of curiosity in her tone. Jonathan sighed. "Emily, well, she's complicated. We were engaged for 2 years, but she ended things suddenly. Said I was too cold, too focused on work. She wanted someone more grounded, I guess. Sounds like she was looking for something you weren't ready to give," Sophia remarked thoughtfully. "Maybe," Jonathan admitted, "but I'm done living for other people's expectations. I want to redefine who I am. Starting with this." Sophia nodded slowly. "I can understand that. People have tried to define me by my lowest points, but I refuse to let them. You have to take control of your own narrative." Jonathan met her gaze and saw something in her eyes, an understanding that went deeper than words. They weren't so different after all. Both of them had been shaped by loss and struggle. And now, both of them had the chance to create something new. As they left the cafe, Jonathan held the door open for Sophia. The night air was crisp, and the street was quiet except for the distant hum of traffic. "Do you have a ride?" Jonathan asked. Sophia shook her head. "I'll manage. It's not far from here." Jonathan hesitated, then offered gently, "I could have my driver take you home. Or anywhere you need to go." Sophia smiled faintly. "Thanks, but I've got it covered. I'm used to walking." "All right," Jonathan said with a nod. "I'll be in touch soon." "Thank you for agreeing to this, Sophia. It means more than you know." She met his gaze one last time before turning to walk down the street. Jonathan watched her for a moment, a mixture of curiosity and admiration stirring inside him. He had a feeling this was only the beginning of something far more profound than he had anticipated. As he climbed into the back seat of the limousine, Jonathan couldn't help but wonder how much the night of Emily's wedding would change, both for him and for Sophia. The limousine glided through the quiet streets of the city. Jonathan sat in the back, occasionally glancing at his phone, but mostly lost in thought. The wedding was only a few days away, and though he had everything meticulously planned, a sense of unease still lingered. It wasn't the event itself that worried him. It was Sophia. She wasn't just another player in the world of calculated social maneuvers that Jonathan was so accustomed to. There was an unpredictability about her, something raw and real that he couldn't quite grasp. He had sought someone unconventional, and Sophia certainly fit that description. But he hadn't anticipated how much she would already be occupying his thoughts. The car slowed to stop in front of a modest building in a quieter neighborhood. It wasn't Sophia's address. She didn't have one, but she had asked to meet here to discuss next steps. Jonathan stepped out of the car and approached the entrance, where a small sign read, "Community Outreach Center." Inside, the atmosphere was welcoming but simple. A few volunteers moved between tables, sorting supplies and handing out meals to those in need. Jonathan caught sight of Sophia near the back, chatting with a woman who held a small child in her arms. The tension in his shoulders eased slightly. Seeing Sophia in her element grounded him. Sophia noticed him approaching and gave a quick nod to the woman before walking over to meet him. "You're early," she said, folding her arms with a playful smirk. "I'm known for my punctuality," Jonathan replied with a faint smile. "Looks like you've been busy." "Yeah, this place means a lot to me," Sophia said, glancing around. "They helped me when I was at my lowest. Now I do what I can to give back." Jonathan admired the way her eyes softened as she spoke. There was a sincerity to her that few people in his world ever showed. It's impressive. You've built something meaningful here. Sophia shrugged, though a hint of pride flickered across her face. It's not much, but it makes a difference. They walked toward a quieter corner of the center, away from the bustle of activity. Jonathan leaned against a nearby pillar, his gaze settling on Sophia. You didn't tell me much about this place when we met. How long have you been involved here? About 2 years, she replied, crossing her arms. After I lost my job and my apartment, I found myself on the streets. The people here helped me get through those first few months. I wouldn't have made it without them. Jonathan frowned slightly. I can't imagine what that must have been like. Losing everything. It was brutal, Sophia admitted quietly. But you learn to adapt. Survival becomes your top priority. Eventually, you stop thinking about what you've lost and start focusing on what you can do with what you have left. Her words hung in the air for a moment. Jonathan had always thought of himself as a survivor in the corporate world, but it was nothing compared to what Sophia had endured. He respected her more with every passing moment. You're stronger than most people I know, he said softly, including myself. Sophia tilted her head slightly, studying him. You've been through your own battles, I'm sure. You don't get to where you are without scars. Jonathan gave a short laugh. You're not wrong, but my scars are different. They're the kind that come from ambition, from always having to prove I belong in rooms full of people who'd rather see me fail. Sophia's expression softened. Sounds exhausting. It is, Jonathan admitted. That's why I'm doing this. The wedding, bringing you along. It's not just about Emily. It's about showing them all that I don't need their approval anymore. Sophia nodded slowly. I can understand that. People love to put you in a box, but you don't owe them anything. You just need to be yourself. That's the hard part, Jonathan muttered. I've spent so long playing the game that I'm not even sure who myself is anymore. Sophia smiled gently. Maybe this whole thing is your chance to find out. Their conversation shifted to more practical matters as they discussed the logistics for the wedding. Jonathan explained the guest list, the high-profile nature of the event, and the kind of reactions they might face. So, basically, we're walking into a lion's den, Sophia summarized, raising an eyebrow. Pretty much, Jonathan replied with a chuckle. But I have a feeling you can handle it. Sophia's confidence didn't waver. I've faced worse than snobby rich people. I think I'll be fine. Jonathan admired her composure. It wasn't just bravado. She had an unshakable core that fascinated him. In a world where so many wore masks to fit in, Sophia was unapologetically herself. One more thing, Sophia said, her tone growing serious. I'm not going to pretend to be someone I'm not. If people ask about me, I'll tell the truth. No fake backstory or fancy cover-up. I wouldn't want it any other way, Jonathan replied. The whole point is to challenge their assumptions. Sophia nodded in approval. Good. We're on the same page then. As they wrapped up their conversation, Jonathan glanced around the center once more. Seeing the people Sophia helped gave him a new perspective on his own life. For all his wealth and success, he realized how disconnected he had become from the realities others faced daily. You know, he said thoughtfully, maybe I've been looking at this all wrong. This isn't just about proving a point to my peers. It's about proving to myself that I can be more than what they expect. Sophia smiled. Sounds like you're finally starting to get it. They stepped outside, the cool evening air refreshing after the warmth of the center. The streetlights cast long shadows on the pavement as they walked together in companionable silence. Jonathan broke the quiet first. Do you ever think about going back to nursing? Sometimes, Sophia admitted, but it's hard to rebuild after losing everything. The system isn't exactly forgiving when you've hit rock bottom. Jonathan frowned. Maybe I can help with that. After the wedding, we can talk about ways to get you back on track. Sophia gave him a curious look. You don't have to do that, Jonathan. "I know," he said simply. "But I want to. You've already done more for me than you realize." Sophia didn't respond immediately, but a small, grateful smile tugged at the corners of her lips. "All right, let's take it one step at a time." They reached the corner where their paths would diverge. Jonathan's car waited a few feet away, but he hesitated for a moment. "I'll see you soon," he said, extending his hand. Sophia shook it firmly. "Yeah. And Jonathan, thanks for believing in me." "Likewise," he replied softly. As he climbed into the limousine, Jonathan watched Sophia disappear down the street. A sense of anticipation filled him. This arrangement had started as a plan to regain control of his image, but it was quickly becoming something far more personal. For the first time in years, he felt like he was on the cusp of real change. And he knew deep down that Sophia Bennett was going to play a pivotal role in that transformation. The day of the wedding arrived with all the grandeur Jonathan had expected. The estate where the event was being held sprawled across acres of manicured gardens and gleaming marble structures. Rows of luxury cars lined the long, winding driveway as high-profile guests made their entrance in designer outfits, each competing for attention under the crystal-clear sky. As the limousine approached the entrance, Jonathan felt a subtle tension tightening his shoulders. He had been to countless events like this, but this one carried a unique weight. It wasn't just any wedding, it was Emily's. And tonight, he wasn't here as the lone ex left to be pitted or mocked. He was arriving with Sophia Bennett, someone who, despite her background, radiated a presence unlike anyone in this world. The car came to a smooth stop. Jonathan glanced at Sophia, who sat quietly beside him. She wore an elegant navy blue gown that hugged her figure just enough to be sophisticated without trying too hard. Her hair was swept back, and a simple silver bracelet adorned her wrist. Yet, what stood out most was her calm confidence. There was no nervous fidgeting, no wide-eyed awe at the display of wealth around them. She seemed grounded, unshakable. "You ready for this?" Jonathan asked softly. Sophia turned to him, a small smirk playing on her lips. "You're the one who should be nervous, not me. I've handled worse situations than a bunch of rich people in designer clothes." Jonathan chuckled, feeling some of the tension ease. "Fair enough. Just stick with me, and we'll get through this circus together." The driver opened the door, and Jonathan stepped out first, offering his hand to Sophia. As she took it and gracefully exited the limousine, a wave of murmurs rippled through the crowd of guests gathered near the entrance. All eyes were on them. Jonathan could almost hear the unspoken questions racing through their minds. Who is she? Where did she come from? Why is Jonathan with her? Sophia, however, remained unfazed. She met the curious stares with quiet poise, her gaze unwavering as she walked beside Jonathan. They made their way up the marble steps, the soft click of her heels echoing in the air. Inside the reception hall, the grandeur only intensified. Massive chandeliers sparkled overhead, casting a golden glow over the sea of elegantly dressed guests. Waiters moved seamlessly between groups, offering champagne and hors d'oeuvres. Classical music played softly in the background, creating an atmosphere of refined opulence. Sophia took it all in with a measured glance. "So this is what high society looks like," she murmured under her breath. Jonathan leaned in slightly. "Pretty ridiculous, right?" "It's excessive," she replied, a hint of amusement in her voice. "But I guess that's the point. Show off enough shiny things, and people think you've got your life together." Jonathan smiled. "Exactly. It's all smoke and mirrors." As they moved further into the room, a familiar figure approached Emily. She wore an ivory gown that shimmered under the lights, her blonde hair styled in soft waves. Her expression was neutral, though Jonathan noticed the slight arch of her eyebrow when she saw Sophia. "Jonathan," Emily greeted, her voice smooth but laced with subtle tension. "I didn't think you'd come, Why wouldn't I? Jonathan replied casually. It's a big day. Wouldn't miss it. Emily's gaze shifted to Sophia, her eyes narrowing slightly in curiosity. And you are? Sophia Bennett, Sophia said, extending her hand. A friend of Jonathan's. Emily hesitated for a brief moment before shaking her hand. It's a pleasure to meet you. I wasn't expecting Jonathan to bring someone new. Sophia met her gaze evenly. Well, life's full of surprises. Emily's smile tightened slightly, but she quickly composed herself. Indeed. I hope you both enjoy the evening. I have a few other guests to greet, but we'll catch up later, I'm sure. With that, she turned and walked away, her presence leaving a slight chill in the air. Wow, Sophia said quietly. She's intense. Yeah, Jonathan muttered, his jaw tightening. That was actually tame compared to what I was expecting. Sophia touched his arm lightly, grounding him. You okay? Jonathan exhaled slowly, forcing himself to relax. Yeah, let's just get through this. They began mingling with the crowd, Jonathan introducing Sophia to a few acquaintances. As expected, reactions were mixed. Some guests were polite but distant, their curiosity barely masked behind thin smiles. Others were openly dismissive, their condescension poorly disguised. Jonathan, a voice called out from nearby. William Hart, one of Jonathan's most persistent business rivals, strode toward them with his usual air of smug superiority. He wore a tailored black suit and an expression that suggested he thrived on other people's discomfort. William, Jonathan greeted coolly. William's eyes flicked to Sophia, his smile widening. And who's this? I don't believe we've met. Sophia Bennett, she said firmly, extending her hand. William shook it, though there was a hint of arrogance in his posture. Ah, Sophia, a pleasure. I must say, Jonathan, you've certainly surprised us tonight. Emily wasn't expecting you to bring someone so intriguing. Sophia's eyes narrowed slightly, but she kept her composure. Funny how people are always surprised by what they don't understand. William blinked, momentarily caught off guard by her sharp response. He chuckled awkwardly and cleared his throat. Well, it's good to see you, Jonathan. We should catch up later. Sure, Jonathan replied curtly, watching as William retreated into the crowd. Nice work, Jonathan whispered to Sophia, a grin tugging at the corners of his mouth. You shut him down perfectly. Sophia shrugged. People like him aren't hard to figure out. They hide behind their arrogance because deep down, they're scared. Jonathan's admiration for her deepened. In this world of pretense and power plays, Sophia was a rare force of authenticity. As the evening progressed, they continued navigating the social maze, facing more subtle and not-so-subtle challenges. But with every encounter, Sophia held her ground, earning Jonathan's respect and gratitude. At one point, they found themselves near the edge of the dance floor. The music softened, transitioning to a slower tune. Jonathan hesitated, then turned to Sophia. Care to dance? He asked, extending his hand. Sophia blinked in surprise. You're serious? Why not? Let's give them something else to talk about, he said with a playful smile. After a brief pause, Sophia took his hand. They stepped onto the dance floor, moving in sync to the gentle rhythm. For a moment, the world around them faded. The tension of the evening melted away, replaced by a quiet connection that neither of them fully understood, but both could feel. You're full of surprises, Jonathan, Sophia murmured softly. So are you, he replied, meeting her gaze. And I'm starting to think that's exactly what I needed. As they continued to dance under the glittering chandeliers, Jonathan realized that tonight wasn't just about reclaiming his image. It was about discovering something far more important, something real. And for the first time in years, he felt like he was exactly where he was meant to be. The dance ended to polite applause, and Jonathan and Sophia stepped off the floor, the intensity of their connection still lingering in the air. The whispers and glances from the surrounding guests hadn't ceased, but Jonathan found that, for once, he didn't care. He felt strangely lighter, almost as if the weight of expectations that had always suffocated him was starting to dissolve. "Not bad for someone who claims not to be a dancer," Sophia teased, adjusting the bracelet on her wrist. "Beginner's luck," Jonathan replied with a grin. "Or maybe I just had a good partner." Sophia gave him a playful nudge. "Flattery will get you everywhere, Mr. Brooks." They chuckled softly, but their light moment was soon interrupted by the arrival of another familiar figure. Margaret Sinclair, one of the event's social queens and a close family friend of Emily's, strode toward them. She was in her late 50s, impeccably dressed in a floor-length emerald gown, with sharp, calculating eyes that seemed to take in every detail at once. "Jonathan, it's been ages," Margaret cooed, her voice dripping with forced warmth. She gave him a kiss on the cheek, her gaze lingering briefly on Sophia. "And who might this lovely lady be?" "Sophia Bennett," Jonathan said, stepping slightly closer to Sophia as if to shield her from whatever scrutiny Margaret was about to unleash. "Sophia Bennett," Margaret repeated, letting the name roll off her tongue as if testing its weight. "Charming. And how exactly did you and Jonathan meet?" Sophia's expression didn't waver. She met Margaret's gaze head-on and replied smoothly, "Jonathan and I connected through mutual circumstances. Let's just say we both have a deep appreciation for people who see past appearances." Margaret's smile froze for a moment, but she quickly recovered. "How refreshing. You know, Jonathan has always been so selective with the company he keeps. It's nice to see him broadening his horizons." Sophia raised an eyebrow, her voice calm but cutting. "Selective company doesn't always guarantee good company. Sometimes stepping outside your usual circles opens doors you didn't know you needed." Margaret blinked, clearly caught off guard by the response. Jonathan fought to suppress a grin as he watched Sophia expertly deflect the subtle insult. "Well," Margaret said, her tone tightening slightly, "it's always fascinating to meet new faces. Enjoy the evening, both of you." As Margaret sauntered off, Sophia exhaled softly. "Wow, she was a lot." Jonathan laughed. That was Margaret Sinclair. She's been a gatekeeper in this social scene for decades. If you manage to rattle her, you're doing something right. Sophia rolled her eyes. "People like her think they own the world. It's exhausting." "You're telling me," Jonathan muttered. "But you handled her perfectly." Sophia shrugged. "It's all about standing your ground. People like that test you to see if you'll fold. Once you show them you're not intimidated, they lose their power." Jonathan nodded thoughtfully. He had spent years playing by these unspoken rules, constantly seeking approval from people like Margaret. But tonight, watching Sophia navigate these interactions with grace and strength, he felt a shift in his perspective. Maybe he didn't need their validation after all. As the night progressed, the atmosphere began to shift subtly. Some of the initial tension surrounding Sophia's presence faded as guests gradually accepted her presence. A few even engaged her in genuine conversation, curious about her sharp wit and grounded demeanor. Jonathan watched from a distance at times, marveling at how seamlessly she adapted to this world despite never having been part of it. At one point, he found himself in a conversation with David Langford, a prominent real estate mogul. The two men exchanged pleasantries and small talk about market trends, but Jonathan's mind kept drifting back to Sophia. He noticed her speaking with a young woman near one of the buffet tables. The woman looked nervous, clearly overwhelmed by the event, but Sophia's calm presence seemed to ease her anxiety. They laughed together quietly, and Jonathan felt a surge of admiration. David followed his gaze and chuckled softly. "She's quite impressive, isn't she?" Jonathan turned back to him. "Sophia? Yeah, she is. I wasn't sure what to make of her at first," David admitted. "But she's got something genuine. It's rare to see someone like that in places like this." Jonathan nodded, a sense of pride swelling in his chest. She's not like anyone I've ever met. David gave him a knowing smile. Well, it's good to see you breaking the mold, Jonathan. Sometimes we need someone to remind us of what really matters. Jonathan didn't respond immediately, but David's words lingered in his mind. What really mattered? It was a question he hadn't allowed himself to ask in a long time. Later, as the evening wound down, Jonathan and Sophia found themselves on the estate's terrace once again. The cool night air was a welcome contrast to the warmth and noise inside. They leaned against the stone railing, gazing out at the moonlit gardens below. "You've been pretty quiet," Sophia said, glancing at Jonathan. "Just thinking," he replied, "about how different tonight feels compared to other events like this. Usually, I'm just going through the motions, trying to keep up appearances. But with you here, it's different." Sophia smiled softly. "Maybe you're finally seeing things for what they are. All this wealth and glamour, it's just window dressing. What really matters is who you are when no one's watching." Jonathan nodded slowly. "You're right. I've been so caught up in playing the game that I lost sight of that. But tonight, you reminded me that I don't have to play by their rules anymore." Sophia reached out and gently touched his arm. "You don't. And you're stronger than you think, Jonathan. You've got everything you need to create a life on your own terms." Jonathan met her gaze, the sincerity in her eyes grounding him. "Thank you, Sophia. I don't think I've ever had someone believe in me like you do." Sophia chuckled softly. "Well, I know what it's like to feel lost. Sometimes all it takes is the right person to help you find your way again." They stood in comfortable silence for a while, the distant sound of music drifting from the reception hall. Jonathan felt a profound sense of clarity, as though the walls he had built around himself were finally crumbling. "Tonight isn't going the way I thought it would," he admitted quietly. "It's going better." Sophia smiled. "Good. Maybe that means we're both on the right path." Jonathan took a deep breath, savoring the moment. For the first time in a long while, he felt truly present, unburdened by the expectations of others and filled with a sense of possibility. Together, they turned back toward the reception hall, ready to face whatever else the night had in store. But something had already shifted between them, a foundation laid for something deeper. Neither of them knew exactly where this journey would lead, but for now, it was enough to take it one step at a time. The night was nearing its peak, and the reception hall had become a whirlwind of conversations, laughter, and clinking champagne glasses. Guests buzzed around in tightly woven cliques, their chatter blending into a symphony of gossip and self-importance. But none of that seemed to matter to Jonathan anymore. Not tonight. His focus was elsewhere, on Sophia and the quiet strength she carried through this world of pretense. Sophia had slipped away to help a woman whose heel had broken near one of the side corridors. Jonathan observed from a distance, noticing how effortlessly she moved through each interaction, disarming people without even trying. It was a skill she likely developed on the streets, adapting quickly, sensing people's intentions, and breaking down their barriers with a simple, authentic presence. A faint voice pulled Jonathan from his thoughts. Paul, his assistant, approached with a cautious expression. "Mr. Brooks, a word." Paul asked quietly, glancing around to ensure privacy. Jonathan stepped aside with him. "What's going on?" "It's about Emily," Paul said. "She's been talking to some of the more influential guests tonight. Word is, she's trying to plant some doubts, suggesting Sophia is just another one of your business stunts. She's implying you brought someone from a lower background just to make a point." Jonathan's jaw tightened. He shouldn't have been surprised. Emily always had a knack for manipulating perceptions, particularly when it came to social politics. But this felt like a step too far. "Of course she is," Jonathan muttered. "She can't handle the idea that I might be happy without her approval. Do you want me to intervene?" Paul offered. "No," Jonathan replied, shaking his head. "Let her play her games. Sophia and I can handle it." Paul hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "Understood." Just thought you should be aware. As Paul walked away, Jonathan exhaled slowly, steadying his thoughts. He had spent so much of his life letting people like Emily dictate the narrative around him. Tonight, that was going to change. A few minutes later, Sophia returned to his side, her brow furrowing slightly when she noticed his tense expression. "Everything okay?" "Emily's stirring the pot," Jonathan said with a sigh. "She's spreading rumors about why you're here. Apparently, I'm just using you as a statement piece." Sophia crossed her arms, her eyes narrowing. "Of course she is. She can't stand not being the center of attention, can she?" Jonathan chuckled softly. "Pretty much." Sophia shook her head in mild disbelief. "You know, I'm not surprised. People like her are desperate to control the narrative. But we're not here to play by her rules." "You're right," Jonathan agreed, his voice firm. "We're going to own this night, and we're going to do it on our terms." Sophia smiled, a glint of determination in her eyes. "Good. Let's make sure they remember it." The two of them began moving through the crowd again, but this time with a renewed sense of purpose. Jonathan introduced Sophia to more guests, subtly asserting her presence without needing to defend it. The dynamic began to shift. While some continued to gossip behind closed smiles, others seemed genuinely intrigued by Sophia's candid approach. At one point, a group of older guests approached them, led by Robert Harrington, a retired judge known for his no-nonsense demeanor. Robert extended his hand to Sophia with a warm smile. "Jonathan's been introducing you around tonight," Robert said. "It's not often we meet someone who isn't entrenched in this world. Tell me, what do you make of all this?" Sophia shook his hand firmly and met his gaze. "Honestly, it's a lot of sparkle and show, but I've learned that beneath the surface, people are all the same. Everyone has their struggles, no matter how much wealth or power they have." Robert chuckled approvingly. Spoken like someone who's seen both sides of life. "I respect that." Sophia nodded. "I have. And I've learned that sometimes the people who look like they have it all are the ones hurting the most. They're just better at hiding it." Robert's expression softened. "Wise words. You're a breath of fresh air, Ms. Bennett. We could use more people with your perspective in places like this." As the conversation continued, Jonathan noticed how easily Sophia won over even the most skeptical guests. She wasn't trying to impress them. She was simply being herself. And that authenticity was more powerful than any carefully rehearsed charm. Later in the evening, Jonathan and Sophia stepped out onto the balcony once again, seeking a moment of quiet. The night air was cool and crisp, carrying the faint scent of flowers from the garden below. They leaned against the railing, their shoulders nearly touching. "You were amazing tonight," Jonathan said softly. "People are starting to see you for who you really are." Sophia sighed lightly. "It's strange. I've spent so much time being invisible, fighting to survive. Now, suddenly, people are paying attention. It's overwhelming." Jonathan turned to face her. "You've earned that attention, Sophia. You have nothing to prove to anyone. You're stronger than most people here, and they see it, even if they won't admit it." Sophia met his gaze, her eyes glistening slightly in the moonlight. "Thanks, Jonathan. You've believed in me from the start, and that means more than I can say." For a long moment, they simply stood there, the silence between them filled with unspoken understanding. Jonathan felt something shift inside him, something deeper than admiration. He hadn't expected to find someone who could break through his walls so effortlessly. But here she was, standing beside him, grounding him in ways no one else ever had. "I think tonight was about more than just showing up, Emily," Jonathan said quietly. "It was about realizing what really matters. And I think I've been looking in the wrong places for a long time." Sophia smiled gently. "Sometimes life has a way of pushing us toward what we really need. Maybe this is one of those times." Jonathan reached for her hand, intertwining his fingers with hers. "I'm starting to think you're right." They stood like that for a while, gazing out at the night sky, their connection deepening with every passing second. Neither of them knew exactly where this journey would lead, but for the first time in years, Jonathan felt a sense of peace and purpose. Together, they were breaking free from the chains of their pasts, ready to build something new, one step at a time. The air inside the reception hall grew heavier as the evening stretched on. While the atmosphere remained festive on the surface, Jonathan could sense a subtle tension building beneath the polished smiles and polite conversations. Emily was working her game, spreading half-truths and sly insinuations in an attempt to undermine him and Sophia. He had expected as much, but it still gnawed at him. As he scanned the room, he spotted Emily near a group of influential guests. She glanced in his direction, a knowing smirk tugging at the corner of her lips. Jonathan clenched his jaw and turned away, not willing to give her the satisfaction of knowing she had gotten under his skin. Tonight wasn't about her. It was about reclaiming control, not just of his image, but of his life. Sophia returned from a brief conversation with a guest and noticed Jonathan's expression. "She's still at it, isn't she?" Jonathan sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "She's like a dog with a bone. Can't stand the idea that I might be happy without her approval." Sophia tilted her head thoughtfully. "You know, people like her don't actually have as much power as they think. They rely on fear, on the idea that you care about their opinion. But if you stop giving it weight, they lose that hold over you." Jonathan nodded slowly, absorbing her words. "You make it sound so simple." "It's not," Sophia admitted. "But it's worth trying. Otherwise, you'll be trapped in their game forever." Jonathan gave her a small smile. "You always know exactly what to say. You've probably faced worse than Emily, though." Sophia chuckled softly. "I've faced situations where survival was my only option. People like Emily wouldn't last a day in my shoes." He admired her resilience, how she could take on the world without flinching. In a room filled with people obsessed with power and image, Sophia stood apart, grounded in a truth that none of them could touch. A sudden announcement drew their attention. One of the event organizers stepped forward to address the guests. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're about to begin the toast. Please make your way to the central hall." Jonathan grimaced. The toast. It was bound to be another opportunity for Emily to stir the pot. He felt Sophia's hand on his arm, steadying him. "Let's face it head on," she said quietly. "We've got nothing to hide." Jonathan nodded, the tension in his body easing slightly. Together, they moved toward the gathering crowd. Guests formed a loose circle around the newlyweds, champagne flutes in hand. Emily's husband, Charles, was the first to speak, thanking everyone for attending and sharing a few light-hearted anecdotes. His words were met with polite laughter and scattered applause. Then, Emily took the microphone. Jonathan's stomach tightened. She wore a dazzling smile, but her eyes gleamed with something sharper. "I just want to take a moment to thank all of you for being here tonight," Emily began, her voice smooth and practiced. "It means the world to Charles and me to be surrounded by so many friends and loved ones. Of course, it's always interesting to see faces from the past as well. Life has a way of bringing people back into your orbit, sometimes in the most unexpected ways." Jonathan could feel the subtle jab in her words. The crowd chuckled lightly, sensing the underlying tension but unsure how far Emily would take it. "I've learned a lot about growth and resilience over the years," she continued. "And I think it's important to remember that true strength comes from knowing who you are, no matter what others may say or do. Some people spend their whole lives trying to prove something, when really, they just need to let go." The room grew uncomfortably quiet. All eyes flicked between Emily and Jonathan, waiting to see how he would react. Sophia's hand tightened around his, a silent reminder that he wasn't facing this alone. Jonathan took a deep breath and stepped forward. "Emily," he said, his voice calm but firm. "Thank you for those inspiring words. You're absolutely right. Growth and resilience are important. And sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is stop caring about the opinions of people who no longer matter. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Emily's smile faltered, the control she had wielded so effortlessly beginning to slip. Jonathan wasn't finished. I think we all have moments where we realize we've been living under someone else's expectations, he continued. But tonight is a celebration of new beginnings, for you and Charles, and for all of us who are finally ready to define our own paths. The guests applauded, some more enthusiastically than others. Sophia gave Jonathan an approving nod as he returned to her side. That was perfect, she whispered. You took back control. Jonathan smiled softly. Couldn't have done it without you. As the crowd began to disperse, Emily approached them. Her expression was carefully neutral, though Jonathan could sense the frustration bubbling beneath the surface. Impressive, she said quietly. You've changed, Jonathan. I didn't think you had it in you. People change, Jonathan replied evenly, especially when they stop letting others dictate their worth. Emily sighed, crossing her arms. Look, I didn't come here to fight. I guess I wanted to see if you were still the same man I walked away from. Jonathan met her gaze without flinching. I'm not, and I think we can both agree that's for the best. Emily nodded slowly. Maybe you're right. Maybe we both needed this. For a moment, the tension between them seemed to dissolve. They weren't enemies, just two people who had outgrown the roles they once played in each other's lives. Congratulations, Emily, Jonathan said sincerely. I hope you and Charles find happiness. Thank you, she replied softly. And I hope you find what you're looking for too. With that, she turned and walked away, leaving Jonathan and Sophia standing together under the soft glow of the chandeliers. Jonathan exhaled deeply, feeling a strange sense of closure. It's over, he murmured. Finally, Sophia smiled gently. Sometimes you have to face your past to move forward. You did that tonight. Jonathan reached for her hand once more, lacing his fingers with hers. And now, I'm ready to build something new. With you, if you're willing. Sophia's eyes glistened under the lights. I'm more than willing, Jonathan. We've both come too far to turn back now. They stood together in quiet understanding, the noise and grandeur of the event fading into the background. For the first time in years, Jonathan felt free. Free to be himself. Free to create a life built on authenticity and purpose. And as the music swelled around them, he knew this was just the beginning of a journey that would change both of their lives forever. The echo of Jonathan's speech still lingered in the air as the night moved on. Slowly, the tension that had thickened the atmosphere began to dissipate, replaced by a subtle shift in how the guests interacted with him and Sophia. The looks of condescension and curiosity faded, giving way to something closer to respect, even admiration. For the first time that evening, Jonathan felt like he was no longer being judged but seen. He and Sophia made their way toward the garden at the edge of the estate, seeking another moment of peace away from the crowd. The path was lined with lanterns that cast a soft, golden glow across the stone walkway. Crickets chirped in the distance, and the cool breeze carried the scent of jasmine. Sophia took a deep breath and sighed. You know, I didn't think tonight would go this way. How so? Jonathan asked, glancing at her as they strolled. Sophia shrugged. I thought it would just be a lot of fake smiles and shallow conversations. I was ready to be treated like an outsider all night. But something changed after your speech. It's like people finally started seeing me as more than just that woman. Jonathan smiled softly. That's because you earned their respect. You didn't try to fit in. You stood your ground. And in a world like this, that's rare. Sophia chuckled. Maybe. Or maybe they just realized I'm not here to impress anyone. Exactly, Jonathan replied. And that's why you made such an impact. You showed them what authenticity looks like. They reached a secluded bench near a stone fountain. The water trickled gently, creating a soothing backdrop to their conversation. Sophia sat down and tilted her head back, gazing at the stars that dotted the sky. "I haven't seen stars like this in a long time," she murmured. "When you're living day to day, just trying to survive, you forget to look up." Jonathan sat beside her, his expression thoughtful. "I've been guilty of that too. I spent so many years chasing success that I never stopped to appreciate what was around me. I thought if I worked hard enough, earned enough, I'd finally feel complete." "And did you?" Sophia asked softly. "No," Jonathan admitted, his voice heavy with reflection. "I reached the top, but it was empty. Every achievement felt like a stepping stone to the next one. Nothing ever satisfied me." Sophia nodded, understanding all too well. It's easy to get lost in that cycle. You tell yourself you're doing what's necessary, but you end up losing sight of who you are. Jonathan turned to her, his gaze steady. "But you didn't lose yourself. Despite everything you've been through, you've held on to your core. That's remarkable." Sophia smiled faintly. "It wasn't easy. I had moments where I thought I'd never get out of that dark place. But then I realized that survival wasn't enough. I needed something more. I started helping others because it gave me a purpose. It reminded me that I still had something to offer." Jonathan reached out and gently took her hand. "You helped me more than you realize. You've reminded me what it means to be real, to let go of the facade. I don't want to live in that hollow world anymore. I want something meaningful." Sophia squeezed his hand gently. "You can have that, Jonathan. You just have to keep choosing it. Every day." They sat in silence for a while, listening to the gentle sounds of the night. Jonathan felt a deep sense of peace settle over him, as if the pieces of his life were finally starting to fall into place. He had spent so much time fearing vulnerability, but with Sophia, it didn't feel like a weakness. It felt like freedom. "Can I ask you something?" Sophia said, breaking the quiet. "Of course. Do you think you'll ever truly be free of this world, of the expectations and the pressure?" she asked, her voice thoughtful. Jonathan considered the question carefully. "I think I'll always feel some of that pressure. It's hard to completely walk away from something you've been a part of for so long. But I don't have to let it control me anymore. I can redefine what success means for me." Sophia nodded slowly. "That makes sense. It's not about escaping. It's about changing the rules." "Exactly," Jonathan agreed. "And I think we can create those new rules together. We've both seen the worst of what life can throw at us. Now it's time to build something better." Sophia's eyes sparkled in the moonlight. "I like the sound of that." They stood from the bench and began walking back toward the estate, their steps in perfect sync. Jonathan felt lighter than he had in years, as though a weight he hadn't even realized he was carrying had finally been lifted. As they approached the reception hall, they were intercepted by Robert Harrington, the retired judge they had spoken with earlier. He smiled warmly and gestured for them to join him near a quiet corner of the garden. "I just wanted to say, Jonathan, that your speech earlier was inspiring," Robert said. "It takes courage to speak your truth in a room full of people who thrive on appearances." "Thank you, Robert," Jonathan replied. "I'm done living under those appearances." Robert nodded approvingly. "Good. It's about time someone in your position took a stand. And Ms. Bennett, you've been a revelation tonight. You have a presence that's hard to ignore." Sophia smiled modestly. "I'm just being myself. And that's precisely why it's so powerful," Robert said. "Don't lose that. Both of you, keep pushing forward. This world needs more people like you." After exchanging a few more pleasantries, Robert excused himself, leaving Jonathan and Sophia alone once more. "You know," Jonathan said as they continued toward the hall, "I never thought I'd hear someone like Robert Harrington say something like that to me." "Why not?" Sophia asked. "Because I spent so much time trying to impress people like him without realizing that what they respected most was authenticity," Jonathan explained. "It's ironic, really. The moment I stopped caring about their approval was the moment I earned it." Sophia chuckled softly. Funny how life works, isn't it? Jonathan smiled. But I wouldn't change it. Not now. They re-entered the reception hall, where the atmosphere had become more relaxed. Guests danced, laughed, and mingled without the undercurrent of tension that had marked the earlier part of the evening. Jonathan felt a sense of closure washing over him. He had come here expecting to prove something to the world. Instead, he had proven something to himself. And standing beside Sophia, he knew that this was only the beginning. The reception was beginning to wind down. Guests had started saying their goodbyes, and the once lively music had softened into a more tranquil melody. The estate, bathed in the soft glow of lanterns and chandeliers, looked almost dreamlike in the stillness of the late evening. Yet for Jonathan and Sophia, the night still held something unfinished, something important that neither of them had fully acknowledged yet. Jonathan stood near the edge of the dance floor, watching the remaining guests mill about. Some danced slowly with their partners, others engaged in hushed conversations over half-finished glasses of champagne. He wasn't sure what had changed within him tonight, but there was no denying it. He had come here expecting to wage a battle for pride, to prove himself in front of Emily and the rest of this world. Instead, he had found something far more valuable. Sophia approached from across the room, catching his attention with a small smile. The light from the chandeliers reflected in her eyes, making them shimmer. Jonathan's heartbeat quickened slightly, a feeling he hadn't experienced in a long time. Still holding court over here? She teased as she reached him. Jonathan chuckled. Not exactly. Just reflecting on the night. Sophia tilted her head, curiosity flickering across her face. Good reflections or bad? Good, Jonathan replied without hesitation. Better than I expected, actually. I thought this was going to be a disaster, but somehow you turned it into something else entirely. Sophia gave him a playful nudge. Don't give me all the credit. You made your own choices tonight. You could have let Emily get under your skin, but you didn't. That's growth, Jonathan. Jonathan sighed, a mixture of relief and introspection in his expression. It feels like a turning point, like I'm finally stepping out of a shadow I've been living under for years. Sophia smiled warmly. That's a big step. Not everyone finds the courage to do that. Jonathan turned to face her fully, his gaze steady and sincere. I wouldn't have gotten here without you. You've reminded me what it means to be real, to let go of the image I thought I had to maintain and just live. Sophia looked down for a moment, a faint blush creeping into her cheeks. When she met his eyes again, there was a vulnerability there that hadn't been present before. You've helped me too, Jonathan. I didn't realize how much I'd closed myself off from people. I've been so focused on surviving that I forgot what it was like to actually connect with someone. Jonathan gently took her hand, lacing his fingers with hers. Maybe we were meant to help each other find that again. Sophia squeezed his hand lightly. Maybe we were. A hush fell over the room as the lights dimmed slightly for the final toast of the evening. The newlyweds stood at the center of the dance floor, thanking the guests for attending and wishing them a safe journey home. Jonathan and Sophia watched quietly from the sidelines, their hands still intertwined. When the toast concluded, a soft, romantic melody filled the room. Couples began to pair off for one last dance. Jonathan hesitated for a moment, then turned to Sophia with a gentle smile. "Dance with me again?" he asked, his voice low but hopeful. Sophia's eyes sparkled with a mix of surprise and affection. "You really are full of surprises tonight, aren't you?" "Just trying to keep you on your toes," Jonathan replied with a grin. Sophia took his hand, allowing him to lead her onto the dance floor. As they moved together to the rhythm of the music, everything else seemed to fade away. The grandeur of the estate, the murmurs of the remaining guests, even the weight of their respective pasts. None of it mattered in that moment. They danced slowly, their steps in perfect sync. Jonathan couldn't remember the last time he had felt so at peace. He glanced down at Sophia, who met his gaze with a soft, knowing smile. "You're different than I thought you'd be," she said quietly. "How so?" Jonathan asked. "I figured you'd be like all the others, closed off, obsessed with image and control. But there's more to you than that," Sophia replied. "You just needed someone to remind you." Jonathan nodded thoughtfully. "I think I spent so long trying to prove myself that I forgot who I really was. But tonight, it's like I can finally breathe again." Sophia rested her head lightly on his shoulder. "You deserve that, Jonathan. We both do." As the song drew to a close, they lingered on the dance floor for a moment longer, neither wanting to break the spell. Finally, Jonathan led Sophia back toward the terrace, where the cool night air greeted them once again. They stood at the railing, gazing out at the moonlit gardens. "You know," Jonathan began, his voice contemplative, "I've been thinking about what's next. For the first time in years, I don't feel tied down by expectations. I want to build something new, something meaningful." Sophia turned to him, curiosity and hope shining in her eyes. "What kind of something?" "I'm not sure yet," Jonathan admitted. "But I know it involves giving back, helping people the way you've been helping others through that community center. Maybe we can do it together." Sophia's expression softened, and a smile spread across her face. "That sounds incredible. I've always wanted to expand what we do at the center, but didn't have the resources. With you on board, we could really make a difference." Jonathan nodded, a sense of purpose igniting within him. "Exactly. We've both seen how hard life can be. If we can use what we've learned to help others, then maybe all those struggles will mean something." Sophia reached for his hand again, their fingers intertwining effortlessly. "I'm in. Whatever this next chapter looks like, I'm in." Jonathan squeezed her hand gently. "Good, because I can't think of anyone else I'd rather do this with." They stood together in silence, savoring the moment. The stars above seemed to shine a little brighter, as if the universe itself was acknowledging their newfound path. For Jonathan and Sophia, this was more than the end of a single evening. It was the beginning of a journey filled with possibility and hope. As the last guests began to leave the estate, Jonathan and Sophia remained on the terrace, watching the world around them settle into quiet peace. They had broken free from their pasts, and now, together, they would create something new, something real. 1 year later, the sun shone brightly over the newly renovated Bennett Community Center, casting a warm glow across the crowds gathered for its grand reopening. Families, local officials, and volunteers filled the spacious outdoor courtyard, where colorful banners and tables of refreshments created a festive atmosphere. Children played on a new playground, while adults mingled, exchanging stories of hope and recovery. Jonathan stood near the entrance, wearing a relaxed smile. He couldn't remember the last time he had felt so fulfilled. Dressed in a simple button-down shirt and jeans, he looked almost unrecognizable from the man who once lived and breathed corporate strategy. This was a different kind of success, a purpose-driven one that didn't rely on wealth or approval. Sophia approached him, clipboard in hand, coordinating with the center's volunteers. Her hair was tied back in a loose braid, and the soft breeze carried the scent of freshly planted flowers from the nearby garden beds. When she saw Jonathan, her face lit up with a warm smile. "Everything's running smoothly," Sophia said, sliding the clipboard under her arm. "We've already signed up over 50 new families for programs. It's incredible." Jonathan grinned. "It's more than incredible. It's a new beginning for this community. And for us." Sophia stepped closer, her gaze softening. "We couldn't have done this without you, Jonathan. Your support made this possible." "You gave me the vision," Jonathan replied, reaching for her hand. "All I did was help build it. This place is as much a part of you as it is of anyone here." Sophia glanced around at the lively scene, her eyes glistening with emotion. It's hard to believe we're standing here after everything we've been through. Sometimes it feels like a dream. Jonathan squeezed her hand gently. It's real. And it's just the beginning. The ribbon-cutting ceremony began shortly after. Jonathan and Sophia stood side by side, each holding a pair of ceremonial scissors as the crowd applauded. Sophia gave a short, heartfelt speech, thanking everyone who had contributed to the project. Her voice was steady but filled with passion, inspiring hope and determination in those listening. Today isn't just about a new building, Sophia said, her voice carrying over the crowd. It's about creating a space where no one feels invisible, where everyone has a chance to rebuild, to thrive, and to know they're not alone. This is a place for second chances, and I'm living proof that second chances are worth fighting for. The crowd erupted in applause as the ribbon was cut, officially marking the start of a new chapter for the center. Jonathan felt a swell of pride, not just for Sophia, but for everything they had accomplished together. Later that afternoon, the two of them walked through the bustling interior of the center. Volunteers guided families through various stations, healthcare services, job training programs, youth activities. The walls were adorned with murals painted by local artists, each one depicting stories of resilience and hope. Sophia stopped near a group of children who were laughing and playing with art supplies. She crouched down to speak with them, encouraging their creativity and asking about their projects. Jonathan watched from a few steps away, his heart full. When she stood and rejoined him, he chuckled softly. "You're a natural with them." Sophia shrugged modestly. "They remind me of what it felt like to dream again. It's powerful." Jonathan nodded thoughtfully. "This is what I've been searching for all along, a purpose that actually matters. I spent so many years trapped in a world where everything was about status and control. But this feels real." Sophia smiled, intertwining her fingers with his as they continued walking. "We're building something that lasts, Jonathan. And the best part is we get to do it together." As the sun began to set, painting the sky with hues of orange and pink, Jonathan and Sophia stood on the rooftop terrace of the community center. From there, they could see the entire neighborhood, once filled with hardship, but now brimming with hope and possibility. Jonathan took a deep breath, savoring the cool evening air. It's hard to believe how much has changed in just a year. Sophia leaned against the railing, her gaze distant but peaceful. Change doesn't happen overnight, but when you plant the right seeds, they grow into something beautiful. Jonathan turned to face her fully, his expression serious but tender. "You've changed me, Sophia. You showed me what really matters, and I'll never stop being grateful for that." Sophia reached up to touch his face gently. "We've changed each other, Jonathan. I didn't think I'd ever find someone who understood me like you do. But here we are." They stood in silence for a moment, the connection between them deep and unspoken. Then, without hesitation, Jonathan leaned in and kissed her softly. It was a kiss filled with gratitude, love, and the promise of a future built on trust and shared purpose. When they pulled apart, Sophia chuckled quietly. "If someone had told me a year ago that I'd be standing here with you, I would have laughed in their face." "Same here," Jonathan replied with a grin. "But I wouldn't change a thing." As they watched the lights of the city flicker in the distance, they knew that their journey was far from over. There would be challenges ahead, but they had found something rare and precious, a partnership rooted in truth, resilience, and hope. Together, they were ready to face whatever the future held. And now, I want to hear from you. Which part of this story touched your heart the most? Leave a comment and share your thoughts. And of course, if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more narratives like this. Each subscription helps us continue bringing exciting stories to you. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.